Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I am Ted, your host, and for this lecture we are going to I'm going to present our end faith lectures. We've In our last lecture we discussed in the last two lectures really, last two lecture topics, we discussed the breakdown of the Soviet Union, we analyzed the Cold War, and we examined the new problems that fell upon the Bush administration had the United States assumed this sort of global hegemonic role in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. This lecture is going to pick right up where we last left off with the Bush administration on the heels of the collapse of the Soviet Union, on the heels of the war, the first Gulf War, and on the heels of the rise of terror groups, both foreign and domestic. Best exemplified by the attacks by Muslim extremists on the World Trade Center in New York in 1993, and domestically best exemplified by the attack orchestrated by Timothy McVeigh on the federal buildings in Oklahoma City. And with that being said, I'd like to turn to the sort of man of the hour of the United States in the not even mid, but early 1990s, all the way through the rest of the decade. Now that'd be Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton serving as president from 1993 to 2001. President Clinton was a man of political skills. On the one hand, he had phenomenal political skills, a very successful politician, but he also had very ruinous personal traits on the other hand. And his ruinous traits were likened to those of Dick Nixon. His political skills and his personal traits were likened to Dick Nixon, really. Clinton was born in rural Arkansas. He rose from a very humble origins through his intellectual talents. He had a highly distinguished intellectual career, a highly distinguished educational career. He attended Georgetown University. He became a Rhodes Scholar at University College, Oxford, before finally attending Yale University. Clinton was hardworking and a very gifted political campaigner. He rapidly rose through the ranks of Arkansas politics to become the state governor by the age of 32. He was at the time the youngest governor in the republic. Clinton's greatest campaign strength was that he possessed an almost didactic memory, and this allowed him to easily recall the name and concerns of voters, giving him the appearance of someone who deeply cared about their intimate concerns. It gave him the appearance of someone who remembered their story, their wants, their desires, through intense concern, through an intense concern and a very personal, relatable concern to those issues that affected the voters that he met. Now, Clinton was a surprise nominee for the candidacy for president of the United States. He was a surprise national politician in general. He largely gained the party's nomination through the reluctance of stronger Democrats who feared running against President George H.W. Bush. The expectation at the beginning of 1992 was right on the heels of the successful conclusion of the first Gulf War. And the expectation amongst seasoned politicians was that Bush was going to be reelected to office. He was going to easily be reelected to office. He had just overseen a very successful prosecution of a foreign war in an expedient manner and was overseeing the global transition to democracy. It's under Bush that we have our first successful war after Vietnam. It's under Bush that we begin this sort of unrivaled leadership for the world, that we become the global hegemon, that we lead all sectors of the world. There is no capitalist and communist spheres. There's simply the world, and the United States stands at the head, at the forefront. This is all under Bush, where the going expectation with that Bush would be reelected, that he would that he would be a two-term president. The expectation that was the expectation before the Republic went into a very rapid economic decline, which abruptly dissipated the aura of success that had surrounded the first Bush presidency. Another factor that turned support against the president was his decision to raise taxes after publicly declaring that he would do no such thing. Raising taxes is always publicly unpopular, though it might be a politically prudent move and a very fiscally responsible move to make. It's always publicly unpopular and always carries the implication that the populace is going to react somewhat negatively to such an act. Now, during the campaign of 1992, during the presidential campaign of 1992, the economy was a very strict sticking point for Clinton, who placed all of the blame for the economic woes on the shoulders of the president. As stated earlier, Clinton's candidacy was made possible by the conscious decision of stronger Democrats not to challenge President Bush. It was a general rule of thumb in American politics that the incumbent, that is the sitting politician in office, had the upper hand in elections. The general feeling heading into 1992 was that Bush would have a landslide victory, much the same way Reagan had in 1984. There was also a third-party candidate in 1992, H. Ross Perot. Perot was a millionaire who was he's best remembered as a somewhat quixotic figure. Had this quixotic millionaire who just threw his name into the hat. Perot took the initiative and profited from voter indignation over the political system at home. Politics since the Watergate scandal had a sour reputation at home, and political races were always bitterly contested between the two major parties. Now, political candidates use negative campaign commercials to eviscerate one another, and the general public came to the conclusion that the majority party candidates were all in some way or another tainted by impropriety. Perot gained significant attention when he entered the race and received a lot of popular support. Then journalists began to explore his life and found tidbits of strange facts regarding his life and his beliefs and the principles which projected an unfavorable image of Perot. Now, Perot eventually dropped out of the race due to the media attention, but he then re-entered in time for the presidential debates. And Perot, while not winning office, posted the strongest showing of any third-party candidate in American electoral history. Perot garnered 19 million votes, a significant amount for any president, for any national nominee in any regard. Now, Clinton won the election, and he entered into an early confrontation with Congress based on his advocacy of two highly controversial policies. One of his policies centered on allowing openly gay men and women to serve in the military, reversing the don't ask, don't tell policy then in place. And the second was an attempt to introduce a national health care system. And President Clinton, Bill Clinton, caused further irritation by naming his wife, then First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, as the head of the health care reform efforts. Hillary Rodham Clinton was a very gifted graduate of Yale University, and she possessed many fine qualities that would make someone a gifted politician. What she did not have was tact. She was not a very tactful person in her approach. She could be very shrill. in a confrontation with opponents, and in some regards combatives, and not a very and not a person who was very successful at building up the necessary coalitions needed to gain acceptance for a plan, especially for a plan of the magnitude of the healthcare reforms she was pursuing. Now, it was not long before a coalition comprising the American Medical Association, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and major figures within the Republican Party, the opposition party, united to oppose First Lady Clinton's proposals. This was just an overwhelming array of forces, really too many adversaries to contend with, and her plan was in essence doomed due to not having enough, doomed due to her not having made enough conciliatory actions to bridge the divide with her opponents. Now, the Clinton healthcare scheme failed and was among one of President Clinton's biggest policy failures. The result was really an embarrassing failure for the Republic. Of all the industrial powers of the world, the United States alone entered the 21st century without a national health care system. In all the other industrial powers, access to quality health care had become a basic citizen's right. This was one of the many areas of American inequality and led to a long-running joke about healthcare in the United States. And the joke went, American healthcare is the best in the world for those who can afford it. A very stinging but accurate depiction, overview of healthcare in America. Now, the fact that healthcare access was so restrictive made many observers note that medical research in the United States, in the Republic, was not geared towards finding cures for treatments of the most commonest illnesses, but rather towards the suffrage of people who could afford to pay for them. So healthcare had been a pressing concern throughout the 20th century for the Republic, dating back to the Republic's entry into World War I. And the close of the 20th century, so that nearly 20% of Americans still didn't have access to basic health care. Another unique feature was that and this was really something of an anomaly, and this was that those who did have access to health care had access through their employers. That most people who had access to health care didn't have personal health care plans with insurance companies. They had health care through insurance policies, through health care coverage plans, through their jobs. Now, this had the effect of really freezing people in place in regards to employment. New employers were often reluctant to pick up the tab for pre-existing conditions, making career transitions a very risky endeavor for people who may have developed a condition, may have developed a health condition in their 20s or their 30s. You know, switching jobs in your mid 30s, early 40s meant your new employer not picking up the tab for your health care concerns. Now the healthcare battle led to a swift victory for the Republican Party in the 1994 midterm elections. And the new leader of the Congressional Republicans, who had just gained control of both houses in Congress for the first time since 1952, was Newt Gingrich of Georgia. Gingrich came to power promising that to enforce, to fully prosecute what he called the contract with America, which entailed plans to balance the federal budget, which had not been which had really not been done since the Reagan administration took office. He came into to office promising to set federally mandated term limits for all federal level politicians to prevent them from becoming permanent fixtures of what he described as the Washington scene. A move that was calculated to bring congressional term limits. And this was really done in line to bring those limits in line with the presidential term limits, and improve ethics on Capitol Hill. Gingrich had previously established himself as a reformer through his efforts at exposing various corruption scandals on Capitol Hill. So he came in with this sort of reputation as being a reformer. Now we'll break here and we'll pick back up with the story of Newt Gingrich and the rest of the Clinton administration. As always, hit like, subscribe, and comment, and let me know what you thought about this lecture.